Ja, Diné, Cheyenne Nanish do Tsétsêhéstâhese Ashihe de Shitero Bilagana Edishanale. Akwit ego de nest anshle. Greetings, my relatives and my people. My name is Lyla June. I'm from the Nanish clan of the Diné nation. We are also incorrectly known as Navajo. We are indigenous to what is now called New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah, but we call it Diné, the people's land. And today I wanted to share with you some of the beautiful, beautiful, extraordinary examples of indigenous food systems in hopes that they can not only inspire us, but also give us ideas of how to implement these strategies today in the world around us. And I have this picture up here. It's actually a picture of the Florida riverbanks. It's an artist's rendition of an actual archaeological site where we find huge oyster middens. And I love this picture because it just depicts the abundance. I don't know if the buildings are accurate, but we do know the size of the shell mounds is accurate, and that for thousands of years, Floridians harvested oysters sustainably from this region, really changing the landscape around them. And I want to give a few examples of how indigenous peoples have done that, as well as the philosophies that underpin those practices. I don't have a lot of time today, so forgive me for being a little rushed, but we'll do our best. The first ones I want to talk about is the Shawnee chestnut groves. So the chestnuts once grew, they're beautiful tree, the American chestnut, an indigenous food tree. It once grew from Maine all the way down to Mississippi and Alabama. And so it covered quite a huge bit of the eastern United States, as we now call it, although my people call it Turtle Island. And we used to think that all of this was naturally occurring chestnuts. We used to think that this was wild. But now we understand that this was actually a cultivated garden, and that indigenous peoples were not primitive or nomadic or savages, but actually we had incredibly massive civilizations, dense populations that were fed by our really, really strategic food systems. And this particular food system thrived partly because it practiced polyculture. Polyculture is the opposite of monoculture. Polyculture is the cultivation of many different species in one place. And as my friend before said, it's not domesticated, it's allowed to exist freely. So here's an old picture of the Cherokee people standing by one of their chestnut trees. You can see how big they used to be. And we only have black and white photos of the chestnut trees because these chestnut trees actually are almost completely extinct. Because when the colonists came, they thought, oh wow, chestnuts, let's plant them in rows. This will be so fun. Let's propagate them and plant them close together. And we'll have no other trees there. But when you plant these trees in rows close together in monoculture, the trees become weak. And they developed a disease, a pathogenic blight. And it destroyed over 98% of all American chestnuts. And so when we look at the fossilized pollen record, we can take soil cores out of the ponds and see how the pollen fell on the pond and fossilized and fell on the pond and fossilized layer after layer. And we can actually reconstruct the vegetational history, the history of plants in an area for thousands of years back. So we did this in Kentucky, which is the ancient homeland of the Shawnee Indigenous nation, and we saw quite an interesting thing. Don't worry, I will explain it. I know it's a bit, we're all hungry. We don't want to be graphed right now. But on the left-hand side is time. So this is 9,500 years worth of information. So quite an old soil core. And in this red line here, we see chestnut pollen occur kind of coming out of nowhere about 3,000 years ago. Right next to it, we have hickory nut, black walnut, and we have a variety of sumpweed, goosefoot, sunflower coming into the picture, showing that indigenous peoples, the way we interpret this, 3,000 years ago, transformed the whole place into a biodiverse food forest and sustained it for 3,000 years. And so we were not technologically backward. We actually were quite good at farming and quite good at what we did. And this only, you can see the chestnut kind of takes a dip right when in the colonial period, when they all went almost extinct. And so indigenous peoples, we now understand, are more or less responsible for the extent to which the chestnuts grew. And we know that this was partly due to polyculture. So I suggest to all of us today that we cease monoculture and we start doing more polyculture so that the system can be resilient and so that it can thrive and it can last thousands of years. The next one I want to talk about is the ahupuaʻa system in Hawaii. Hawaii, in pre-colonial times, made more food than they do there today, a lot more. And this food system is based by watersheds. So each watershed is a political district in pre-colonial times, like a county. And this watershed is actually, each citizen is responsible for caring for their watershed. And each level of the watershed has different types of food production. And so the food production in the lowlands is the kalo fields, the lo'i. And these taro fields are really, really nutritious. And they created an abundance of food for the people. Just below that, you have the breadfruit trees. And just below that, you have the fish ponds. And so this was a very productive system, layer by layer, producing a lot of food. And a lot of nerds have studied this, and they've found that about 1.2 million people were supported by the ahupuaʻa system. And it was not quite domesticated farming, and it's not quite completely wilderness either. It's something in between, something that I call gardening the earth and bringing out the natural food-bearing capacity of the land and working together on a watershed basis. And so this system supported more people than there are today, and they produced 100% of their food locally. Whereas today, we have less people living there, importing 90% of their food. And so I love this slide because it shows us that indigenous food systems are not cute little things for little tribes, but they actually have the power to feed so many people. And people often say, Lyla, that's very cute, but how are we going to feed 8.5 billion people with these nice little indigenous food systems? And I say, well, first of all, our current food system is not feeding 8.5 billion people. Most of the world is hungry, much of the world. And secondly, if you want to feed 8.5 billion people, these are the exact kinds of systems you would actually want to use, ones that produce abundantly without destroying the overall system. The last thing I'll say is that there's an endangered bird that loves to nest in the lo'i fields, in the kalo fields. And it's a white, beautiful bird. And I love how their farming actually creates habitat for species. So it can be win-win. We can create food and help other people, other species at the same time. And the takeaway from this is that we can all create conventions based on watersheds today to think about how we can collectively manage each of our watersheds that we live in and be responsible for them as the Hawaiian people are. And some of these ahupuaʻas are still in operation today, and they're very beautiful. I've visited them. The next one I want to share is American Grasslands Pyro Management, or fire management. And I'll just read this quickly. The Illinois Confederacy shaped and altered much of this region as an anthropogenic creation. Like many other indigenous groups in North America, their most important tool was fire. Burning the prairies, they made the grasses hospitable for grazers and managed the prairie as a game reserve to maximize productivity. Now, what does that mean? That means that every time you burn a prairie, ironically, it actually comes back healthier and stronger because you're introducing all that nutrient-dense ash into the soil, and it stimulates the microbial activity in the soil. It brings the charcoal, any biochar fans in there in the audience. It helps to bring out the, gives more food for the root system. And so every time we burn, we are actually creating grasslands in the wake of those burns just a few weeks later. And burning was so important for our people that the Miamia Indigenous Nation, who is indigenous to what we now call the Ohio River Valley, has a lunar calendar. And that lunar calendar is very beautiful, and each full moon has a name. And the September moon is called the grass burning moon. That's how important burning was. The October moon is called the Big Smoky Moon. And so there's only 13 full moons in a year. And so you have to be pretty special to get your own moon. And fire got 2 moons. So this is how important burning was to create pasturage for the bison and for the deer and for the elk and other herbivores. So this is what the Miamia have written in their scientific center in Ohio. In Sashakayolia Kilshwa, or the grass-burning moon, we see fire as something that restores and gives new life to the prairie. Fire helps clear the land of old grass and brush and open seed pods that have fallen to the ground. Because of fire, new flowers and plants emerge in the spring. And so fire can actually be incredibly helpful for certain pyro-adapted species. Because indigenous peoples burned for so many thousands of years, certain seeds needed fire to germinate, to burn down the husk so that they can germinate. And this is a beautiful book called Forgotten Fires. He documents how almost the entire United States was routinely, systematically burned by indigenous peoples in a regenerative, safe way to help create grasslands for bison. And we often imagine bison as Native Americans chasing the bison, but now we understand that the bison were following us. They were following our fire as we opened up pasturage more and more and cleared the meadows and made sure that the grasslands were healthy. In fact, the tall grass prairie of the United States is fire dependent. It cannot exist without fire. And it also reduces the level of catastrophic fires because you're burning routinely, the fuel doesn't ever build up so big that if a big fire did come, it would be too big. So fire can actually help prevent fire, ironically. Let's see if this will work. Probably not. I don't know if you guys can push that on your side. This is my brother's farm. He burned one half of his field and he didn't burn the other half. And it was quite amazing how the burnt half, the vegetation was this tall. And the unburnt half, the vegetation was this tall. And I love showing that film, but sometimes it doesn't work. And really quickly, they did the same thing in southern Norway in the Mesolithic era, which is thousands of years ago. These so-called stupid primitive cavemen were managing southern Norway much better than we are today. This nerd here, I love nerds, she studied 63 lake beds in southern Norway, and she studied the fossilized charcoal deposits. And she realized that this whole place had been systematically burned by ancient Norwegians thousands of years ago, again, to help create pasturage for the elk and the deer and what other herbivores there are. I'm not from Norway, but it was very systematic, and this is what she wrote. Anthropogenic burning was different from natural fires. They were smaller and less intense. They were predictable, almost immediately productive, creating mosaics in a complex pattern of vegetation of burnt and unburnt patches. Because they reduced available fuel, they provided protection against the disruptions of natural fires. And so this is not a Native American thing. Indeed, this is a human thing. Around the world, all of us have been an active part for thousands of years of gardening the earth, of cultivating the earth, not in ways that caged it and took away its freedom, but in ways that facilitated it, in ways that helped the life really thrive. The last example I want to give is the clam gardens of the Pacific Northwest. These never mind, I'll get to the takeaway at the end for the fire. We'll talk about that later. But for now, the clam gardens are these ancient rock walls, 2,500 years old, that we see actually created clam habitat. And they're created through the construction of intertidal rock walls, these white rocks. And when you build these rock walls, when the tide goes up and the tide goes down, it fortifies the wall and it creates more of a flat shoreline. Whereas without the wall, the shore becomes much more steep and the clams can't hang out and chill and have their clam parties. So these clam gardens were very important for augmenting clam habitat. And the cool thing about the clam gardens, you can see these ancient rock walls, 2,500-year-old rock walls. Here you see kind of a darker line. That's a man-made rock wall. These beautiful systems were not just designed to feed humans. They were designed to feed anyone who needed to eat from them. So the minks, the raccoons, the water birds, the otters, everyone would come and feast on these clams. And imagine having so much abundance and being so good at gardening the earth that you have enough for yourself and enough to share with all life. And not the least of which who benefits from these is the clams themselves. The clams have a home, and the clams are seen as equal to the people, and they are dealt with as the clam nation. So imagine having so much respect for a clam that you afford it its own nationhood status. And I think when we're able as human beings to look at a clam and honor it as an equal, then we'll be civilized again, to have humility and gentleness and care for other species. That's our highest expression of our humanity. And so the beautiful thing about this is that it's not just the technology that runs these clam gardens. Imagine if you gave these same clam gardens to a capitalist. Do you think it would last 2,500 years? Probably not, right? Because the goal of capitalism is short-term gain at the expense of the future. Or we don't even think about it, like future is not even in the equation. And so these beautiful systems were really about supporting all life and for future generations. And so it's not just the rock walls that made it work. The actual secret, the special energy that makes this work is love. Love for each other, love for the earth, and the value system. And that's what I found in my research, is that it's not so much how Native peoples built these things, but why. That is actually the real secret sauce. And we must garden our inner world well and make sure it's thriving with respect, reverence, reciprocity for the earth, if we ever hope to garden the outer world properly. And I want to show you one inner world very briefly of the Anishinaabeg 7 grandfather teachings. This is an example of the code, the software that helped these systems run. And they are honesty, humility, wisdom, love, respect, bravery, truth. These were the 7 teachings that all Anishinaabeg people were tasked with passing on to the next generation. This was the code of ethics. This was everything. It still is everything to them. I visited them in Wisconsin. They have these 7 words up all around their reservation. Imagine if our banking systems ran off of these 7 things. Imagine if our schools ran off these 7 things. Imagine if our food systems ran off of these 7 things. These things are actually the types of things that make a food system thrive, not the cool things and the little ways and the interesting infrastructures, although those are very interesting, but it's actually our hearts that are the true decider if it will fail or if it will succeed. And these invisible ethics, although we cannot hold them in our hands, we can hold them in our hearts. And even though they're weightless things, they have so much gravity. They have so much power to influence and shape the world. And their absence as well has so much power to shape things. So, oh yeah, each one has an animal that is emblemizes the 7 grandfather teaching. And so what are some of the takeaways? These are the 4 examples I gave. Sorry for the words. I try not to do words on my slides, but create more polyculture farms and food systems for health and resilience, no more monoculture. You can hold annual watershed conventions to collectively manage and care for the system together on a collective basis. We can remember and reintegrate the regenerative power of fire, ash, charcoal, and biochar in agroecological systems for recycling nutrients. And most importantly, love, always love, with love for the land and for each other. That love, I think, is probably the most important thing I could say today. And love is a beautiful thing. Love and compassion is what helps us all to thrive and to be kind to each other and gentle. And the sister of love is humility, to walk softly on the earth. And remember that we are not her ruler, we are her guardian. And we were placed here to be her guardian. And we gotta do that job well. And that's why you're all here, so I'm preaching to the choir, but to be gentle on the earth. So I could keep going, but I'm actually gonna end there because I'm way over time. And this QR code is a QR code to my dissertation, if you would like to check it out. And I do have my drum for a song, but I'm also happy to end here probably should end, right? Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for your time. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you soon.